Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Walk and Talk, the dog training podcast that enables me to come with you on your dog walk and talk lovingly into your ear whilst you head out and stretch your legs with your four-legged bestie. I hope the weather is glorious where you are. I hope you and your dog have had a fabulous week so far, and I hope you're ready to learn some interesting and potentially controversial things about your dog this week, particularly if your dog is actually a dog. And by that, I mean a male dog as opposed to a bitch, because this week I want to do a deep dive into a topic that I don't think gets openly discussed in a overly balanced or science-led way anywhere near as much as it should, considering that the repercussions of this debate include surgery, which no matter how routine should never, in my opinion, be entered into with a blasé attitude. They include permanently and irreversibly altering your dog's hormonal state of being, which in turn will have a permanent effect on who he is to some degree. I'm sure it's obvious by now that I'm talking about neutering, castrating, desexing, whatever you want to call it. And in this episode, I'm going to be focusing on the male dog because the considerations, the risks, the effects, the perks, if you will, of sterilizing males and females through surgery are fundamentally different. So if once you've heard this episode, you've found it really useful or helpful or enlightening to the extent that you want me to do one covering the topic of your female dog too, you'll have to let me know. Write a comment on the podcast episode if you're on Spotify, or you can just come and find me on Instagram at ListenDogTraining and send me a DM or something. I always love to receive them. But for today, we are going to talk about all things boy dog, because I think that it was certainly the case, let's say, a decade ago. I'm thinking back to the first male dog I took on as an adult, that it was kind of considered just the default option that your male puppy would return to the vet at some point within the first year of his life to be neutered. I can remember the puppy health check appointments that you have at the very beginning with your new puppy being not so much a discussion, an open-ended discussion about the pros and cons of neutering or a question of neutering. It was more just a question of what date that surgery was going to happen, because it was simply the expectation. Now, I will admit that I do see that tide turning, and I am becoming increasingly aware of vets having more open conversations with owners about neutering, but still, the vast majority of owners of dogs that are less than a year old that I speak to are still raising the topic of neutering as something that is an inevitability in the timeline of their dog's lives, and quite often as a really broad cover-all solution for a lot of problem behaviours that crop up during adolescence that, to be honest, in my opinion, you're far better off actually addressing through management and training and conditioning than you are through a cut and dry hormonal recalibration. And even in some cases, these owners are completely unaware of the role testosterone is actually playing in their dog's behavior, and unaware of the fact that in some cases, there's a good chance that neutering that dog is going to increase the intensity of their behavior struggle, not resolve it. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to look at the science of testosterone and your dog's behavior. And I want us to think about the common myth that a lot of people still believe today. That is simply, if I neuter my male dog, his aggression, his reactivity, his excitability, it will all disappear. And I think this comes from a really simplified view that we have of testosterone as being the dominance drug or the aggression drug, and that high levels of testosterone equals high levels of, being the first dog ready to bottle another dog at the pub, if you want to anthropomorphize it. And that if we just take away that drug, remove that testosterone, we'll be left with a pub full of calm and loving dogs who will instead just want to instigate a group hug. Now, unfortunately, that's not exactly how testosterone works. So it's true that testosterone does play a role in the establishment of social hierarchy in dogs, but it's definitely a lot more complex than simply high testosterone equals dominance. And just as a side note, because I've said that word before you all try and cancel me, when I use the word dominance, I'm not talking about Meck's alpha wolf theory from the 70s. Even Meck himself admits that that was very poor sciencing on his part, but that is a whole another topic for another episode. I'm sure it will come, don't worry. But for now, let's keep it to the idea of a dynamic social hierarchy, which is not an entirely made up concept at all. It's a very real thing. So, what role does testosterone play in that? Well, testosterone is linked to increased confidence and therefore boldness and assertiveness. However, we have to be really careful when we directly claim that testosterone equals aggression, because confidence and aggression are two different things. And behaviorally speaking, if you take a stable social group of canids, you are far more likely to find that the dogs higher up the hierarchy are actually calmly confident rather than overtly aggressive. And as a human who intervenes professionally with dogs who do show aggressive behaviors, that aggression very often stems from a lack of confidence or an anxious or fearful state of mind, as opposed to an individual that feels so confident in himself that he wants to tell the world how fabulous he feels via the medium of aggression. Now, I think the reason testosterone can take the flak for aggression as a whole is because when it comes to things like mating, for example, testosterone can mean a dog is more likely to posture or mark or behave competitively. But really, in a well-structured group, you will find that testosterone contributes to stability rather than constant conflict. So now that we've established that testosterone is not simply the aggression hormone, let's take a look at some of its vital functions. So first of all, as I've already mentioned, testosterone plays a key role in building confidence. It helps dogs to feel secure and self-assured, and a confident dog is less likely to react out of fear. So, for example, if you have a dog who is dog reactive, they are barking and lunging at other dogs on walks, and they're doing this from a place of anxiety or fear. Side note, not all reactivity stems from fear, but let's take this as an example because it is a very common cause for reactivity. So they're barking and lunging at other dogs because they're worried. Now, neutering that dog is incredibly unlikely to help resolve that behavioral issue in any way. Now, studies also suggest that testosterone is involved in cognitive function and emotional regulation, helping to support your dog's learning and their impulse control. And actually, rather than causing social chaos, it also helps dogs to develop appropriate social skills. So it plays a really integral role in our ability to train our dogs, in our dog's ability to learn both from us and from the social dynamic. So it's really valuable there as well. And of course, let's not dismiss its role in maintaining strength and overall vitality when it comes to protein synthesis for building and repairing muscles, as well as its contribution to bone density and growth plate regulation, particularly in younger dogs. If a dog is going to be neutered, for sure, it's definitely worth at least waiting for that dog to reach full skeletal maturity before doing so, in order to reduce his risk of suffering from joint issues like hip dysplasia or ligament injuries as a result of robbing him of that testosterone too early. Now, you've possibly also noticed that on your dog's food, on the packaging, there's a slight variation in the recommended calorie intake between neutered and unneutered dogs who are otherwise the same age, the same size, same breed, perhaps. And this is because of the role testosterone plays in reducing fat storage and the metabolism slowing effect that neutering has. So let's look at what actually happens when you remove testosterone, especially during adolescence. And studies indicate that around 75% of dogs are neutered during this age range before they've reached sexual maturity at around 6 to 10 months of age, which, given everything we know about adolescence, And if you don't know yet, congratulations, you're one of the lucky ones. But if you want to know, I cover adolescence and its epic struggles in detail in, I think, the second or first, actually, I think it's the first ever episode of this podcast. So feel free to go back and have a listen. But essentially, adolescence is usually when your dog is behaviorally at their very worst and they're most challenging. And this is when you're all neutering your dogs. So, kind of ironically, you have this cohort of teenage dogs who are regressing behaviorally because they're hitting a second fear period, which makes them more reactive. Their brains aren't fully developed yet. So, they're also these jumped up little risk takers. And they've suddenly become aware of the concept of reproduction. So, they're actually biologically primed to become defiant and testing because they are testing what's the best choice they can make to secure the future of their own gene pool. Their brains haven't caught up with the concept of domestication yet. So there is a tension, a friction in the home. And we take these little barking, lunging, defiant wildlings and we neuter them. Now, when their bad behavior is peaking, and then 3 to 6 months later or a year later, we go, well, look at that. All those wild behaviors have stopped because we got those balls off, when in actual fact, all those wild behaviors have stopped and passed because your dog has arrived at the other side of adolescence. Their brain's caught up. They're cooking with a full pantry now, and your adult dog has arrived. Those behaviors you couldn't cope with were going to improve with time and consistency and maturity anyway. If we take teenage boys as an example, right, and I live with two, so I definitely know how real the struggle is. We all know that puberty is a nightmare. These teenage boys are going through it. And yet, when we revisit them at 23, 25, 30, they're out the other side of it. And we certainly didn't need to castrate them to get there. So, do our dogs' behaviours improve after neutering? Yes, in 75% of cases, they may well do, but that's because of the behavioural trajectory our dogs were already on and the fact that we choose to neuter them at the age that we do. So, if neutering is not the behavioural magic wand that we perhaps thought it was, what are some potential side effects that neutering is responsible for if done early in a dog's life? Well, the first is a potential increase in fear and reactivity. So, research suggests that neutered dogs are more likely to develop fear-based aggression, especially if neutered quite early on in their lives. And that without testosterone's stabilizing effects, some dogs can become more anxious and more reactive, not less. And as I've mentioned already, loss of confidence is another biggie. So, testosterone contributes to self assurance, and removing it too soon can create nervous, insecure dogs who are more prone to defensive aggression. And as anyone who works professional behavioral cases knows, many reactive behaviors like barking and lunging, as I mentioned previously, actually stem from fear, not, and I'm using inverted quotation marks here, not dominance. And fear often only gets worse post neutering. So, what can we do in the face of the problem behaviors that can rock up during our dog's puberty? Truthfully, training is always the real solution. As much as we'd love it to be a simple surgery that involves no more effort than the cone of shame and a chicken and rice diet for 3 days, as owners, we need to take responsibility for our dog's learning, and we need to invest time and energy into strategies like teaching impulse control. So, by rewarding calmness, reinforcing alternative behaviors, working with our dog's arousal and helping them grow the cognitive ability to function through it, we need to prioritize socialization and confidence building to prevent these fear-based behaviors. And remember, whenever I say the word socialization, I don't mean force your dog to be social. That's not what socialization is in this context. But I mean controlled and positive exposure to the world to get them used to it. We need to truly ask ourselves if we are meeting our dog's needs on a daily basis, because so many so-called hormonal behaviors stem from frustration or a basic lack of exercise or mental stimulation or drive fulfillment. Is your dog getting all of that juicy good stuff that they need to thrive, because neutering is not your effortless cure-all. And the main reason I wanted to record a podcast that probably feels very anti-neutering, and I don't necessarily intend it to be that, and I will counter that in 1 second, but I wanted to highlight all of these things because I think the general wellspring of public knowledge at the moment is that people, through absolutely no fault of their own, naturally neuter. They naturally view it as the default and they don't really question it. Whereas in some cases, for some dogs, it would be so much more beneficial for that dog to be given some grace and not neutered, because actually, if they're already a fearful or anxious dog, it's definitely not going to help them behaviourally. And as we all know, once your vet has plucked your dog's cherries, he's not getting them back. So you can't undo that decision, but you certainly can, at the very least, delay it. Do a bit more of your own research, have an open and honest conversation with your vet, and make an informed decision rather than just blindly buying a surgery that maybe you don't really want. Now, I did say I'd caveat all this with some situations in which neutering can be a beneficial choice for your dog, because like I said, I am certainly not the anti-neuter brigade, and please don't think that that's what I'm doing. So if your dog has a serious testosterone related medical issue, something like testicular cancer or prostate problems, then neutering is 100% there for you. If there's a strong genetic predisposition for certain health risks, again, neutering is totally there for you. And in all honesty, if managing an intact male is truly unworkable for you as an owner, then neutering is, of course, an available option to you. I don't want you to come to me and say, okay, we babysit my sister's intact female dog when they go to work or they go on holiday, and now my life's a complete nightmare because I have to have them separated and he's losing his mind, or now he's not allowed to go to the dog sitter I rely on because they have a neutered males only policy. I'm not saying neutering is an awful, awful thing to do by any means. What I am saying, to reiterate the main message here, is these two things. Really take a good look at the behavioral issues you are hoping to solve with neutering, and bearing in mind everything I've said about testosterone, ask yourself if you think neutering is really going to help. And if you do want to neuter your dog, I strongly consider allowing him to reach full sexual, physical, and skeletal maturity first, so he's not missing out on any of the developmental benefits of testosterone as he develops. I hope that all makes sense, and I hope you've learned perhaps one or two things you didn't know previously about what testosterone does and doesn't do for your dog, and what you can honestly expect to benefit from when it comes to neutering. If this episode has changed the way you think about neutering, I would love to hear from you. You can DM me any questions or comments at Listen Dog Training on Instagram, or you can leave a review on the podcast itself. And if you think you'd like to explore a training solution for any of your dog's problem behaviors rather than reaching for the scalpel, please don't think it has to cost you hundreds of pounds, because I have a wealth of downloadable, in-depth training plans and guides and behavioral modification programs on my website at listendogtraining.com that cost less than the price, far less than the price of a single phone call with most dog trainers. And you can get started on your dog's transformation today at the click of a button without going anywhere. So without further ado, I do feel it's now time to hang up this discussion about your dog's testicles once and for all and let you enjoy the remainder of your walk. I hope you've had a fab time, and I will see you same time next week on The Walk and Talk.